final lecture, the last lecture in the term of our lecture series, Philosophy and Religious Studies lecture series. And today we are honored with having our guest speaker, Professor Thomas Michael, who is actually speaking from the US. So I'm sorry that it's very late at night at his place. But so thank you, Tom, for this. I know the time is very challenging. So very briefly to introduce Professor Tom Michael. He's associate professor in the School of Philosophy at the Beijing Normal University, and he received his PhD in a history of religions from the University of Chicago. So Michael's two primary fields of research are Daoist philosophy, and today he will talk about this topic, right, Daoism, and a topic that I like very much, I find very intriguing, shamanism in early China. He's the author of several articles on Daoism, and also on the topic published 3 books. The most recent one is Philosophical Enactment and Bodily Cultivation in Early Daoism. So welcome, Professor Tom Michael, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's my tremendous pleasure to be able to give this lecture to you. I've been looking forward to it with great enthusiasm. So I'm just going to jump right into it with my PowerPoint, and we'll take things from there. Let's see. Open. There it is. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to the lecture series of the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Macau. The name of my lecture tonight is Fan and the Taoist Philosophy of Time and Temporality, from Laozi to Huang-Lao. So I do have a couple of quotations here that I'm going to work throughout my presentation. Some of them are a little bit long, but important for my purposes. So Baishi writes, from Laozi to Fan, Baishi writes, in Tai Shigong's preface in Shiji, Sima Tan wrote that the main points of Taoism are the harmony of yin-yang, yushi, qianyi, so on and so forth. Sima Tan's comments are obviously not talking about Laozi's original thought, but about a new Taoist thought that had changed since Laozi, and this is a long-standing point of academic consensus. However, comparing these generalizations of Taoism by Sima Tan with the thought of Fan Li, it is easy to see an astonishing agreement between the two. Therefore, we have sufficient reasons to believe that Fan Li is such a new Taoist. His thought is an intermediary between the early Taoism represented by Laozi and the Huang-Lao Taoism represented by Huangdi, Sijing, and Guanzi. Fan Li's status and contributions to the history of Taoist thought deserve our attention and in-depth study. Now, I'm going to return to this point possibly at the end, but I would like to say right off the bat that I have only recently even ever heard of the name of Fan Li. Apparently he's like super famous in contemporary China for all kinds of reasons. I looked up articles on him, and there are literally thousands of them, but only a few are about the historical family in his historical milieu, and essays that connect him with Taoism are also pretty rare. But it turns out that he is a central key factor in understanding Taoism. So let me say that there is not a single English language publication on Fan Li to this point. All of the articles on Fan Li are, none of them are in English. Okay, So with that said, so I'm very experimental with what I'm doing with Fan-Li. I have very few people to talk with. I mean, in terms of their scholarship and research, particularly since I've been stuck in America for a long time. Now, I want to look at the second point that Bai Shi writes. His thought is intermediary between the early Taoism represented by Lao Tzu and the Huang-Lao Taoism. And this difference is, Bai Shi says, is a long-standing point of academic consensus. Now, in my most recent work, I have tried to explore very deeply this difference between we might call it the early philosophy of Lao Tzu or the original Taoist philosophy of Lao Tzu and the later tradition called Huang-Lao Taoism. My work also looks at other traditions of early Taoism, including Tianshi Taoism, Xuanshui Taoism, different Tao, as well as a line of Taoism from Zhuangzi. So I believe that I see an early line of Taoism very much related to Lao Tzu, but I haven't heard other scholars ever try to name this tradition. Many people talk about Lao Zhuang or Daoji Daojia or things like that. So I have called it Yangsheng Taoism, and I compare it next to Huang-Lao Taoism. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is the main primary contents of my recent book. But when we talk about Yangsheng Taoism, it is centered on a Hung Dao, a temporalizing Dao. What does Hung mean? We'll talk about that. Lao Tzu's original Taoism, in many ways, can be understood as a phenomenology, and it centers on the co-presence of somethingness and nothingness, as we see from Guodian, Tianxia Wangwu Sheng Yu You, Yo Sheng Yu Wu. And Lao Tzu advocates a particular type of bodily cultivation, which we can call Yangsheng, even though he doesn't. Taoists very soon, beginning in the Han Dynasty, the Lieh Xianzhuan, would systematically identify Lao Tzu with Yangsheng. This is an early form of Taoism next to Huang-Lao Taoism. It centers on a different kind of Tao called the Chong Tao. It's a constant, permanent, eternal Tao, as we've come to become very familiar with it, right? From He Gong, from Wang Bi. Its philosophy is very close to a metaphysics, and it gives a priority of nothingness over somethingness, as the Tao Te Ching that we are all familiar with writes, Tianxia Wangwu Sheng Yu You and Yo Sheng Yu Wu. It also talks about a particular type of spiritual cultivation called Zuo Wang. It inherits this from Zhuang's Huang-Lao Taoism, seems to reject Yangsheng, and that's fine. So this is the difference that I'm looking at between Yangsheng Taoism and Huang-Lao Taoism, and what does Fan-Li have to do with it? Okay, so a primary distinction between Yangsheng Taoism and Huang-Lao Taoism is in the separation between Hong and Chong. Hong refers to a temporalization of cyclical time. It gathers through the co-presence of nothingness and somethingness in this single realm of phenomenal existence. Hong is associated with a primordial time, which is temporalized as the condition of being. In other words, time, we can understand time as being. We can look at Tao Te Ching chapter 11 for an example of this type of phenomenology. Clay is needed to make the vessel, the Shanzhi Wei Qi, but the use of the vessel lies in the fittingness of its nothingness and somethingness. Dang Qi Wu You, Qi Ziyong. This is different from a Huang-Lao reading, kind of a metaphysical reading of the constant, permanent, eternal Tao, which is structured along a notion of linear time. The constant Tao is identical with nothingness in the metaphysical realm. Somethingness sustains this ontological realm of the myriad beings. So we can read Tao Te Ching 11. Instead of Dong Qi Wu Yo, Qi Zi Yong, it's Dong Qi Wu Yo Qi Zi Yong. So again, we see the separation between early Taoism, which I call Yangsheng Taoism, and the later line of Taoism called Huang-Lao Taoism, that I started this presentation off by looking at by Xi's words, because he brings Fan Li into it. Okay, a little bit more about Lao Tzu's Hung. We'll see why. This is the notion that Fan Li grasped very tightly. Lao Tzu's notion of Hung. What does it mean for Lao? So Hung is a primordial time. It's a temporalization. It's non-linear time. It's non-standard time. We can envision it, Hung, as waves of temporalization that ebb and flow, much like the original character Hung, which is an ideograph of the waxing and waning of the moon. This is a non-differentiated temporality within the realms of heaven and earth, in other words, all of space. Tao Hungs as temporalization that precedes and conditions space. So space it's a point of philosophical debate among some circles, but I hold that this is what Hung is referring to, that space exists only because of it's been temporalized as the phenomenal field within which the myriad beings are born, exist, and pass away. So we see Guoding and Lao Tzu talk this Dao Hung, Wu Wei Ye, Dao Hung, Wu Ming. Dao temporalizes effortlessly, it does it namelessly. Now, Tao Te Ching 23 gives a very interesting conception of this. Gusting winds do not last the whole morning. Downpouring rains do not last the whole day. Who produces these things? Who produces winds and rain? Heaven and earth. Okay, but that's only half of what Lao Tzu is saying here. The key term is zhong, zhong chao, zhong the whole morning, the whole day. It's lastingness, it's abidingness, the abidingness of the gusting winds, the abidingness of the downpouring rains. This is the notion of temporalization as waves. You cannot literally say the very moment the rain stops, for example, because it stops in waves, it starts in waves, so on and so forth, winds and rains. Okay. So Lao Tzu, I want to take a look at his philosophy of time and temporality, which seems to be concentrated in the notion of primordial time, which Lao Tzu may be referring to with the word Xuan. Xuan is built upon the structure of origin, existence, dissolution. What does the Tao have to do with this? Tao is the event, the ereignis of the mystery of existence. So Tao Te Ching 1 says, and from mystery to manifestation to mystery. I put the word here, Dao Shu, it comes from Zhuangzi. It's a very interesting notion. I think that when we read Zhuangzi metaphysically, the Dao Shu, the pivot of the Tao, is a singular metaphysical transcendent kind of entity. But when we look at Dao Shu through a phenomenological lens of Lao Tzu's philosophy of the Tao, together even with Zhuangzi's philosophy of the Tao, I think we can understand Dao Shu as being pervasive everywhere. Every time a blade of grass comes to birth, that's an event centered on the pivot of the Tao. Now take that single blade of grass and multiply it by every blade of grass on the earth, by every leaf, by every fish, by every human, by every being that comes into existence, emerges from the Tao Shu, which is pervasive in the world. So Tao Te Ching 1 says, hold to the standpoint of nothingness with the intent to witness its wonder, hold to the standpoint of somethingness to witness its manifestations. Now, this again is a different reading that is more reflective of an early phenomenology. It's not Chang Wu Yu, Yiguan Qi Miao, it's Chang Wu, where Chang is verbal, hold to the standpoint of Wu, hold to the standpoint of Yo, hold to the standpoint of Wu to witness its wonder. This is the origin. Hold to the standpoint of somethingness to witness its manifestations. This is its existence and change. And then there's another wonder as a being dissolves back into the world. Lao Tzu confirms this in a later chapter. He says, the myriad beings come bursting forth, Bing Zuo, and by this I see their return. This is the dissolution. The bursting forth is the Tao as an event. Everything flourishes and flourishes, existing in change before returning to its root. And this is called tranquility. I want to highlight this term, Jing, tranquility, because it's going to mark a point of important departure between Lao Tzu and Fan Li. Okay, Lao Tzu's philosophy of time and temporality, one central element is the notion of return. Returning is the movement of the Tao. There was a thing born before heaven and earth, moving in cycles, waves of temporality. I call it the Tao. Forced to name it, the giver of greatness. This is the great Da that I don't think I have my Chinese correct right here. Yeah, the Yue Da. And I owe Professor Wang Xingjie, a great note of gratitude for showing that this Da does not refer to the greatness of the Tao, but it's a verbal Da, it's a gerund, at least as we read Lao Tzu's original philosophy. The Tao greats, the Tao makes great. Heaven makes great, earth makes great, the king makes great. So this greatness means that it penetrates means going far away, and then return. So this is the key element of Lao Tzu's philosophy of Hung as temporalization, this notion of origin, existence, return. Lao Tzu's philosophy of time and temporality. Now, I just want to reiterate that this is precisely the philosophy that Fan Li will later embrace. So the phenomenology of the Hung Dao, it returns, but what returns is the cycles of temporality. So beings do not change in time, but they change in space. In this sense, time as existence is change, because existence and change occurs as temporality, but in space. In this sense of this primordial time, it is perpetually present, and the future is perpetually past. So Tao Hungs, this refers to the non-differentiated temporality of past, present, and future. Now, this is very different from the Changdao, the return of the Changdao, which is seen often as a substantial transcendental entity, which itself is contained within the permanency of time. Now, going back to Lao Tzu's philosophy of temporality, past, present, future, there's a lot more to be said on this. I'm just being very brief, but Lao Tzu talks about holding on to the Tao of antiquity to manage the present. So to know the beginnings of antiquity is to know the genealogy of the Tao, which is ever present. Again, in chapter 21, from the present to right now, from the present back to antiquity, the Tao has never gone away, but it's still present, so present that through it, I can see the beginnings of the multitude. This is a different way of Lao Tzu's stating the Bing Zuo, the mystery, the Xuan of coming into existence. Two more short passages from the Tao Te Ching that integrates the future into the present and the past. Okay, so now we're ready to take a look at Fan who, looking at remembering Bai Shi's comments, we can call Fan an intermediary standing between Lao Tzu's original Taoism and Huang-Lao Taoism. Okay, so just to give a general idea of how to situate Fan historically, we can look at Lao Tzu, his birthday, born 571 BC. Of course, his life is shrouded in mystery. We don't really have a date of decease for him. But we can look at Kongzi, who was born about 20 years later. Both Lao Tzu and Kongzi gave their teachings to disciples. We can look at two more people in this line. We can look at Wenzi, also known as Wenzhong, dates close to Kongzi. You might recognize the name Wenzi from the early Daoist text. Actually, it's a Huang-Lao text called Wenzi, which is likely a much later text that Wenzi probably didn't write, but who knows. And then we get to Fan. So Wenzi is a little bit younger than Kongzi, a little bit older than Fan. Wenzi and Fan both gave their teachings to rulers, King Gojian of Yue specifically. So it's very different. Lao Tzu and Kongzi, their teachings are very different from Wenzi and Fan. The first taught disciples, the latter two advised rulers. So here's a Chinese scholar, Chen Chengzha, who writes that Fan was a disciple of Wenzi, a further disciple of Lao Tzu, and his acceptance of Wenzi's Lao Shui, his Taoist thought, was comprehensive and systematic. At the same time, Fan was deeply influenced by his enemies Wu Zishu and Sun Tzu, so his Lao Shui was quite unique. So just another quick word about Fan. We know him primarily from the Guo Yu Yue Yu Xia, although there are two other versions of his ideas and his historical activities. He was Wenzi met Fan and persuaded him to come to Yue to be an advisor to the king, King Gojian, in his drawn-out war with the neighboring state of Wu. And apparently Wenzi was in charge of the inner concerns of the state, and Fan with the external concerns of the state. And eventually Fan was successful in bringing Gojian to his victory over Wu. So the reason that I want to look at this brief comment by Chen Chengzha is to show that Fan his Taoism had an immediate application to warfare. And we know these Wu Zishu and Sun Tzu, these Bingfa gentlemen, whose particularly Sun Tzu's and Sun Tzu's Bingfa, at least as we have it today, is deep, shares very, very deep similarities to Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. So Fan again, I'm just beginning my exploration of Fan. I'm not sure if Sun Tzu was literally an enemy or also an inspiration, but Fan Li's Taoism, it's hard to set aside the historical situation in which he expressed it, namely as a teaching to a king to conquer a neighboring country. Okay, a couple more pieces of common ground between Lao Tzu and Fan Li. So Ding Yu writes that both Fan Li and Lao Tzu shared the great ambition of stabilizing the country, and both advocated the method of doing nothing. But the difference is in the application of operational means and ideas. The historical data does not record Lao Tzu ever ruling the country, but Fan Li did have the wonderful merit of assisting the ruler. This is presumably the reason that Fan Li's thought is more practical and utilitarian than Lao Tzu's. Another eminent Chinese scholar, Zhao Ke, writes, Lao Tzu explained the philosophical methodology of time in the Tao Te Ching, but the meaning of time in Lao Tzu's philosophical system is different than that in Fan Li's conception of Tiandao Yin-Yang thought. On the basis of this philosophical category, Tiandao Yin-Yang, Fan Li developed the theory of time into a complete set of specific operating rules, which led to further developments of the methodological guiding principle of time in Huang-Lao Taoism. So, all of the things that I have said about Lao Tzu's philosophy of time and temporality are fully present in Fan Li. But Fan Li has altered that philosophy. While it is not yet a metaphysics, Fan Li was instrumental in turning it, Lao Tzu's understanding of temporality, turning it into the direction of metaphysics based on these sorts of reasons. Okay, so Fan Li distinguishes specific qualities of the three realms. For Lao Tzu, Lao Tzu discusses a non-differentiated temporality of time, which simultaneously includes the past, the present, and the future. He discusses a non-differentiated temporality of space, the realms of heaven, human, and earth. Tao Te Ching sort of sets out this blueprint, in essence, Ren Fa Di, Di Fa Tian, Tian Fa Dao. So here we have a kind of ordering of Tian Di Ren or Ren Di Tian. Fan Li coordinates and organizes this hung temporality by differentiating these three realms, but he does so without positing a permanent metaphysical Chongdao that could maintain them. He writes, holding abundance is of heaven, Zhiying, determining and adjusting is of humans, Ding Qing, and nodal affairs are of earth, Jie. Now, a lot of these translations that I have, some of them reflect traditional understandings, some of them don't. Some of them reflect what I think might be considered Lao Tzu's original meanings to a certain extent. So, Ding Qing, I translate this as determining and adjusting, but Ding Qing means something like ordering, or it means to stabilize what is leaning over or about to fall, right? Is it a verb noun or a noun noun or a verb verb? Well, we can look at Yang, that's a verb noun, and we look at Jie. Those are two nouns. So Ding Qing, I'm not sure. I translated as determine and adjust, because what humans or the sage or the ruler, what they do is they determine and adjust their own affairs, which is kind of just another way of saying politics and government, right? So we can say government is of human beings, but the terms ding, qing have a different kind of resonance. Okay, so Fan distinguishes the specific qualities of Tiandi Ren. Heaven primarily refers to or evokes the space through which temporality pulses. And there are different temporalities. One of the sections of my recently published book looks at these different temporalities, specifically from one particular poem from the Shijing, where it's talking about this Hung temporality directly. And it mentions these different temporalities, which Fan Li accepts all of them. There's a lunar temporality, the time of the moon, a solar temporality, the time of the sun, biological temporality, geological temporality. There's a multitude of different temporalities, and this is the province of heaven. The earth involves the temporal nodes, Jieshir. Again, there are a lot of different ways that people have tried to understand Jieshir and translate Jieshir. Nodal means a knot where things kind of transition. So a Jieshir are transitional affairs or transitional times. And the great majority of transitional times, temporal nodes, can be understood as expressions in the movements of the seasons. And then we get to humans, so determining and adjusting their affairs in compliance with the different temporalities that flow through heaven and earth. So Fan Li has really zeroed in on the specific qualities of Tiandi Ren that Laozi never did. Okay, Fan Li then goes on to coordinate these three realms within his understanding of temporality. So Laozi's Hung temporality is not changed by Fan Li. He doesn't change it. But what Fan Li does is he organizes its holism into a system, a jur, really important word here. So what does the system include? It includes on the one side, Tiandi Ren de Ren, humanity, humans, the realm of the humans, science, society, civilization, and history. And Fan Li organizes it, attempts to organize it in coordination with heaven and earth, or nature and the world. So this is one of the key phrases of Fan Li. He writes, because time has a way of returning, or maybe temporality has a way of returning, and affairs have their intervals, there is a way to know the hunging system of heaven and earth. Once known, then one can acquire the completed benefits of heaven and earth, where there are no intervals between affairs. And when the time is not returning, then one must console the people and safeguard education in order to await them. To put this another way, when it's time to act, act. When it's not time to act, don't act, but safeguard education, take care of your people, and wait for the time to act. So, okay, human affairs are to be coordinated with this hunging system of temporality by respecting the intervals, the jian in between, referring to the period after an affair has ended, for example, after the end of planting, but before the next affair has begun, namely harvesting. And you can look at this through the intervals between each of the 4 seasons. And if you're familiar with some of these ancient Chinese calendars from various works, you'll know that there are these intervals all over the time. Okay, this coordinating of human affairs depends with heaven and earth, depends on the ability to know the hunging system of heaven and earth. Okay, so the Tiandichi Hengzhi. This hunging temporalization consists of primordial time. Now, this again comes real directly from Laozi's philosophy of time. So for Fan-Li, the hunging temporalization consists of primordial time gathering in cycles that begin at one moment and end at another moment before returning again to the origins. The notion of the Dao Shu could be very helpful in understanding this. So the cycles of gatherings of primordial time, they begin, they end, and begin again. This hunging temporalization is not Chang, it's not constant, it's not permanent, it's not eternal, because it is rhythmic, and one must bide one's time to await the returning rhythms. The hunging system, this is a very interesting idea, right? The Hengzhi, is it discovered? Is it an actual part of reality out there to be discovered? Is it fashioned? Is it manipulated? Or is it just formulated as any theory that attempts to express actual reality? So the hunging system, whether discovered, fashioned, or formulated, is for human beings. And it centrally involves the Ding Qing. Fan-Li calls this the hunging system of heaven and earth. But if you remember the blowing winds and the pouring rains from the chapter from Laozi, in this hunging system of heaven and earth are neither the source of temporalization nor the object of it. The Tiandichi Hengzhi does not signify their ownership of this temporal system of temporal or their agency to make it work, but that it is of heaven and earth means that it encompasses the spatial range of the entire world. So in this sense, we can see that Fan-Li has not yet taken the leap into metaphysics. The hunging system attempts to track waves of temporalization by way of the intervals between them to coordinate human affairs with heaven and earth. And what is hunged is time itself. What hunging temporalizes is time primarily understood in terms of seasons. Chen Xiaohua, there's a number of really interesting Chinese articles by some very, very interesting Chinese scholars who I'm reading, and I'm learning many things from them. Chen Xiaohua writes about the times and affairs, the sure and the sure for the growth of all things. Time is the season and order of the growth, and affairs are the related activities of people. So this is where the system comes in, to coordinate time and affairs. An interval is an opportunity to take some action. It refers to the momentums of time. I've spoken of waves of time. I'm going to keep going through this a little bit more quickly. Laozi talks about the tranquility of this temporality, but Fan-Li is much more ambitious with it. He wants to coordinate it. finally maintains Lao Tzu's Hung temporalization for coordinating times and affairs, but coordinates or focuses on human affairs in ways Lao Tzu never did. So he says human affairs must coordinate with heaven and earth. Then you can have success. Zhao Ke writes, this does not mean passively waiting for the interval to stop and the wave of temporalization to begin. He's talking about learning how to manipulate it. So in this, we can see the big influence of Sun Tzu, for example. So two primary aspects of the hunging system of heaven and earth. This is all really great stuff from Bai Shi and Zhao Ke. The two aspects are coordinating the realms of heaven, earth, and human, number one, and number two, relying on the Tao of heaven to clarify human affairs. Notice that the Tao of heaven is used only for clarifying human affairs. It has no other big purpose, as it will, Tian Dao, as it will in Huang-Lao Taoism. Tian Dao is a central metaphysical notion of the Tao's transcendence, but for Fan Li, it's mostly a source of coordination. He writes that the Taoist of heaven is full but not overflowing, prosperous but not arrogant. It labors, but it doesn't boast of it. The sage complies with time in taking his action, called abiding the time. If heaven's time does not emerge, you cannot be a guest. If human affairs do not arise, you cannot make them start. Today, the king is overflowing before he is full. He is arrogant before he is prosperous, and he does labor, but boasts of his merits. This is the king of Wu, not Gojian. Heaven's time not emerging, human affairs not arising. He says this is to be in opposition to heaven. So here we have this coordination of sure and sure, time and affairs. And talking about the Tian Dao Yin Yang Sixiang, the Tao of heaven is August. Sun and moon have their measures, their brightness is Fa, their smallness is Xing. Yang arrives and then Yin, Yin arrives and then Yang. So we see this Tao of heaven in action, clarifying for us so we have the knowledge of this system. Okay, these are the three realms. These Fan Li isolates them to a certain extent so that he can coordinate them. So it's just a brief introduction to the essence of these three realms. Heaven, so when Shangdi or Tian cannot be verified, Kao, one should await the return of time. So if heaven is not there, wait for it. It's ominous to forcefully demand the time to act. Taking the time, acting when it's not complete, heaven's verifications, it will return to you and you will suffer calamity, you will lose your virtue and your name will be destroyed, and then you will be exiled and die. So big threats here, right? But he also says, finally, when the time comes, there should be no slack. Because the time, you won't get this chance again. Time happens and then it moves. When heaven gives an opportunity to act and it's not taken, that will return with disaster. So now he's talking to Gojian. If you win, you're on the attack and then you fall back and you don't take the opportunity, then the situation will turn around, it will change, and you will regret it. Here it's talking about heaven's nodes, the changing of heaven's temporality, the time, attack, defend, Sun Tzu Bingfang, right? About earth, the Jie Shi are of the earth. Only earth encompasses all things to treat them as one. Its affairs, its business, what earth does, never goes wrong. Earth produces all things, accommodates birds and animals and nourishes them, names them, benefits them, beautiful and ugly, and supports all life. And then we have human. Heaven responds to human, and sages respond to heaven. Now, when I first read this, Tian Yin Ren, Sheng Ren Yin Tian, I thought, that makes no sense. How does heaven respond to humans? This seems to contradict a lot of what Fan-Li was saying. But then we read the second part of the sentence, and everything becomes clear. Humans produce it, whatever it is that they make, that humans make. And then heaven and earth forms it, whether it's a jug or a shovel or a bowl of rice, a baby, a house. And sages respond to that and complete it. Sages integrate the things that humans make, formed from heaven and earth. Sages integrate that into society, right? Okay, so this is the hunging system in action. This is my last big slide. So what does this hunging system look like? How does it actually work? We have some interesting examples here. I've reduced this. There's a lot of drama involved in the Yeyu Xia. I've cut around it. So the king said, Shen Xu, a famous minister, remonstrated, but the king of Wu got angry and had him killed. So that's bad. Can't we attack Wu now? And Fan-Li replied, hold on. Reverse junctures are beginning to sprout. Nijie, time, Fan-Li says, time is starting again. It's reversing and starting again. But heaven and earth are not yet ready. The time is not yet. It says, if we attack Wu, we will fail and be punished. Wait. And then the king says, at a different episode, the king says, I wanted to attack Wu, and you kept telling me, no, not yet. Wei Kai. But now neither the crabs nor the rice are reproducing. What's going on? Everything is not right for them. We can use this time to attack. Finally, he said, heaven's response is utmost use in everything, but the human affairs are not yet completed, right? So heaven has to be ready, earth has to be ready, and then Ren, sure, human affairs have to be ready. This is this total coordination. So finally he says, please wait. The king said angrily, are you telling me the truth? Or are you just trying to deceive me? Because I was talking to you about human affairs, but then you responded by talking about the functioning of heaven. What's going on? And Fan-Li replied, hey, buddy, don't get mad at me. Human affairs necessarily must be coordinated with heaven and earth. Then the attack will be successful. And then the last one, the king says, now that king of Wu has forgotten his people because of his enjoyment, his pleasures. He's disturbed the people's merit. He goes against heaven. Sages do not appear at his court. Loyal ministers have their bones broken, and the people all fight against each other. No one agrees with each other, and the rich and poor all steal from each other. Can't we attack now? Fan-Li replied, human affairs have arrived. So now it's a time based on human affairs. It's the human condition is so bad, it's okay, except heaven's response. Remember the cow, Tianzhi cow, has not yet come. It's consent. So we have to wait a little bit longer. I mean, everything worked out. Fan-Li helped King Gojian. He attacked Wu, and it was good. Okay, so these are my some of my concluding thoughts. So this presentation on Fan-Li as an intermediary standing between Yangsheng Daoism and Huang-Lao Daoism is an attempt to understand the special qualities and characteristics of Taoist philosophy from Lao Tzu's original phenomenology to its later Huang-Lao metaphysics. Fan-Li remains an intermediate but integral actor who shows us some of the crucial ways the Taoist philosophy developed from the Eastern Zhou, from Lao Tzu, to the Han Dynasty. We even say He Shanggong. Much work remains to be done on this topic. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very fascinating. I would now like to open go to the questions. I don't know if there are those that, yes, I can see your hand, and then those that are online can also write their name into the chat box. So that I can, but Ellen, I can see your, okay, so, yes, please, Ellen.
Oh, thank you. Tom, thank you so much. It's a fascinating talk. I really want to learn more about that. Part of the reason is actually recently I just submitted a paper myself on Huang-Lao and the Huangdi Sijing, dealing with Huang-Lao's idea about the military thought. I think what you said here indirectly give me more inspiration here. I didn't really talk too much about Fanmi in my paper. I focus on the text, but what you said, of course. Let me back to the specific issue that you mentioned, the question about temporality here.
Yeah.
Okay, from what you just explained, it seemed to me that that the term temporality here and is used by you with several dimensions. Okay, first, of course, traditionally temporally dealing with what we call the linear procession of time in terms of past, present, and future. But of course, in Laozi and also, you know, in the whole idea of a Hengdao, here we have also this what we might call a cyclical movement, or even a notion of repetition, this notion of returning. You know, return is kind of a cyclical returning, like the 4 seasons that you mentioned. But I'm very intrigued by the notion of interval here. You emphasize in between, because usually we say interval is indicated the amount of time between 2 given times.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a thing people mostly ignore when we talk about temporality here. And so I think and then you put that into this idea about the what we call a triad relationship between heaven, earth, and human. You know, how the human events, you know, activities take place in between. I think this is a really fascinating notion. But when you toward the end of your talk, I think there's another dimension of time that I don't know if something you want to indicate it. It is the timing, about whether it's ready or not, whether it haven't responded yet or not. I don't know whether, do you think it has something to do with what we call timing, and plus whether it's connected with the Huang-Lao thought about 因时与和. How do we understand 因时与和 in terms of temporality? That's something I want to get from you. Thank you.
Yeah. You might be interested in the paper I recently wrote. It's in the Dao journal from Yonghong.
Okay.
It looks at the overlap in ideas between Laozi and Sunzi, between Dao De Jing and Sunzi Bingfa. And one thing that both of them talked about, this is a kind of a substantial section of that essay that I wrote, was looking at how they use these terms qi and zheng. In Sunzi, they are often translated as surprise attack and frontal attack. Laozi uses the same 2 words in a different, very much related, but a different contextual meaning. And the notion of the surprise attack, the qi.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sunzi's metaphors, but he has that metaphor of pulling the bow and releasing it at exactly the right moment. He talks about, the momentum of it. And so it's that snap of an instant when you take the opportunity, just like that, you release your troops, right? The surprise attack. That's timing, right? Timing is really, now that you mention it, timing is really the whole point of Fanli's Hangzhi, his system of temporality.
Mhm.
It's not directed towards long life. It's not directed towards tranquility, right? He's really directing it to activity of politics, of warfare, of human interactions. I mean, he applies it to every component of life, as you read in the Yu Xia. So that's this notion of timing. And it just leads me back to thinking that Sun Tzu maybe wasn't an enemy. He might have been a teacher of Fan in some way that Lao Tzu was a teacher, maybe not a personal teacher, and finally was an actual disciple. I think finally is a little too young for that.
Mhm.
Um, but that military component, I mean, the whole Yu Xia is constructed around a military invasion, right? Everything is based on timing. It's not the timing of releasing your soldiers, but it's this universal timing. And this is also reflected in Sun Tzu. Not as clearly, but it's there. Sun Tzu talks about reading, I forget the actual Chinese, he talks about reading the signs, reading the marks.
Mhm.
So looking at the trees, and when the birds fly away, you know, something's going on over there, right? Of just reading nature. So Fan is at this pure juncture of Lao Tzu's Taoism and Sun Tzu's Bingfa thinking. And as you say, that this also plays a tremendous role in the Huangdi Sijing, particularly when Huangdi himself is, you know, trying to win his war, and he has to learn how to wait for the moment. There's this one line, it says, you know, when Huangdi has been in retreat for, I think, 3 years, I think, and he comes out and he says to his minister, I forget his minister's name, but his minister says, I really want to check the actual Chinese text. The minister says, now is the time. Now is the time to strike. You can do it now. And that comes from family. That comes from this notion of timing, right? So I think you're really right to focus on the importance of this idea of timing within temporality. So the relation between timing and temporality goes through this notion of the J, right?
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
nodes. That's how they tie. And so I'm
Yeah.
coming
Okay.
at it by myself. It's like Jay, sure. It's like, oh, it sounds like a nodal affair. Well, what is a nodal affair? And it's like, well, that's what I have to figure out. What is Jay sure? So
Yeah.
one of the great things about this text is Ryu Sha, because it builds right into the stuff I was talking about in my book. It's all about Hongdao and Chongdao. Um, um, it, uh, so when Fan Li comes up with this stuff, it's like, wow, I know, I feel like I have a feeling for what he's getting at. But if I were just trying to understand Fan Li through the Huangdi Sijing, like, and that is Tao Te Ching thought, you know.
Yeah.
Huang-Lao Taoism is original Tao Te Ching thought. I don't know how to make sense of it. So, but thank you. That was great.
Thank you. Can I have the last comments, actually? I don't know if you have read Huangdi Yingfu Jing. It's another one. And I really want you maybe go, because to me it's really so difficult text to decipher, but also dealing a lot with about the question about time and temporality. Maybe I would like to you maybe in the future give me some idea what's the book really about. It's called Huangdi Yingfu.
Yeah. If you have a link for that, I'm sure it's online, maybe at the ctext.org. I don't know, but yeah, I would be really interested in pursuing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Is there any other question? I can see here in the chat, there is a question from Umeisha. The question is, so she says, Chinese Taoism is about the existence of somethingness and nothingness, which sounds really mysterious. It reminds me of Gothic novels and films that are also mysterious. To some degree, I see many similarities between Taoism and the Gothic genre. For example, Earth can be understood as nature, and heaven can be something supernatural that Gothic literature and films always include. Do you see any relations between Taoism and the Gothic?
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I have a hard time making out parts of your question. You're a little bit far away from the microphone, I think, and it doesn't carry very well.
Oh,
In the
okay.
chat room.
I am reading.
Oh, you're reading it. Okay.
Chat, the message.
Thanks for. I'm really interested in philosophy in China as well as the West. Is this the right one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Chinese Tao. Oh, okay. Chinese Tao is about the existence of somethingness and nothingness, which sounds really mysterious. It reminds me of Gothic novels and films that are also mysterious. To some degree, I see many similarities between Taoism and Gothic genre. For example, Earth can be understood as nature, and heaven can be something supernatural that Gothic literature and films always include. Do you see any relations between Taoism and Gothic? Oh, sure, because Taoism wants to privilege the darkness in a sense, but darkness, and this is where Taoism sort of diverges from Western conceptions, whether Gothicism or things like that, is that yin, at least to a lot of Taoists, some Taoists, yin is evil, and to other non-Taoists, yin is also evil. But to a lot of Taoists, and I think especially Laozi, yin is to be celebrated. Part of the sensibility of Goth is, as nature, right, is that it is juxtaposed with light and brightness, right? And so Goth is kind of an effort to privilege the darkness. And in that, Laozi has a great affinity with that. So why the darkness? What's interesting about darkness? Well, darkness is wet. It's fecund. Darkness is cool in the sense of temperature, also cool in the sense of Elvis Presley. Brightness is sharp and clean in a sense. And so in the Tao, you know, you need both yin and yang. And you know, the tradition of Taoism has, you know, all kinds of dark practices, but they're not necessarily evil or not even evil at all. And that's one thing about Goth compared to other kinds of groups in the West. I think that Goth celebrates darkness without feeling like you've committed yourself to the devil. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Goth is a celebration. As Taoist yin, as Taoist darkness is also a celebration of profundity, a celebration of mystery. I mean, the term Xuan that I was discussing, I would easily associate Xuan with Goth, you know, Mary Shelley, all these sorts of things, you know, even The Cure. I mean, are you looking the band called The Cure, or the author Mary Shelley who wrote Frankenstein, Bram Stoker's The Vampire. Yeah, that's So if you, whoever asked the question, if you are studying Goth in film or in literature, if you study Taoism, you can, maybe Taoism will give you lots of inspirations and insights about further studying and exploring and understanding Goth. So I think that's a really interesting point.
Thank you, Tom, for this exhaustive reply. I would like now I have a curiosity. You mentioned in your answer the dark practices. You said Taoism, there are many dark practices, not necessarily bad or evil, all right? So can you give some examples of these dark practices that are not considered to be evil?
Oh, for example, if you read Gahong, and if you read, for example, his Shanqian, you see lots of Taoists who are actually going right into the darkness, right into the mountains. And they all stay in very dark caves. And when they're in those very dark caves, they see writings on the wall. Or, you know, if you think of Goth, or if you think of Western occultism or things like that, speaking with ghosts and spirits and these sorts of things, this is what these Taoists are doing in these dark, moist, living, vibrant mountains. They come across Xian, you know, Shenxian. And the Shenxian, they come in darkness, they don't come in daytime. And so these are kind of dark practices, right? I mean, you can't really have fear when you are going to stay by yourself in a very dark cave on a really big mountain. That's kind of a dark practice, and literally dark, not dark in the sense of evil or bad, but dark in the sense of literal darkness. There's lots of other things that can be said about kind of the dark practices of Taoism, but again, dark not in the sense of evil, but dark literally in the sense of darkness. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hey,
Hi,
Tom.
Chai.
Yeah, it's very interesting to attend your presentation.
Thank you.
You know, mostly when we talk about Fanny, we talked about him as a practitioner of Taoist theory, because he really put a lot of Taoist teachings into real world, into real life. Especially in what you mentioned, the warfares, the business. So he was very successful to apply these kind of teachings. So we took him as an example of Taoist theories. But what you discussed tonight, you brought him into the philosophical discussion. So you talked about, the being, the non-being, the temporality, the heaven, earth, and human, such kind of things. So you really brought him to the philosophical realm. I think that's very, very interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting, very profound. My question is that some scholars think the original Taoism, the Laozi and Zhuangzi, they started their thinking and their theories in South China. That's a true state, which finally, helped the Goujian. So that's from the south. But people haven't found the clue or the root how Taoism spread from south to north. And they think Fan Mi was an important figure, as you mentioned, like immediate. So between the original Laozi and Zhuangzi and Huang-Lao Daoism. And Huang-Lao Daoism got popular in North China, in the cheese, like the
Yeah.
cheese state. Did you find some traces or proofs of Fan Li also played this role to spread Taoism from south to north?
Several of the only writings on Fan Li I've ever seen are all in Chinese, not a single writing in a Western language. But and I have about 30 articles that I've read on Fan Li. My students help me, so I'm not reading about Fan Li and modern day business practices and
He
Wall
was very
Street.
famous. He was very famous among commercial business people.
I heard
Fan Li was deified. He was a
yes,
patron god
become-
for business.
yeah, they call him Zaishan, the
Tao
god of wealth.
Tao Zhugong. That's a
I
name.
heard-
But yeah.
Yeah, that's so I heard that there was a Chinese who was the coach of a soccer team, a football team, and he used Fan Li's philosophy for his soccer team. That's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah.
But I guess he had a really gorgeous girlfriend too.
Yeah, beautiful. Most beautiful
A
lady.
really gorgeous girlfriend.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to stick around with Go Jian after he defeated Wu, because finally he said, "Oh, you just kill everybody, so I'm not gonna get killed. So I'm just gonna leave." And he hid. He escaped in a slow boat.
Yeah.
With Shisher.
Yes.
And then so it turns out that the historical records don't say a lot about, a little bit, but not very much about Fan Li after he left Yue. But many of the good articles that I've read, they commonly say that it's likely that Fan Li went to the Jisha Academy, or went there before, and he was instrumental in, I need to look more at it. I don't think he was instrumental in creating the Jisha Academy, but he might have been instrumental in initiating the Daoist philosophy at Jisha Academy. I mean, this is just, I can't tell you, like, whoa, what is happening? I've never heard of Fan Li my entire life. Now he's like one of the most important people to me. I had no idea. So it's a really exciting discovery for me as a Westerner to come, to come to China and to live in China and talk to Chinese scholars and find out things just like this that I had no idea who Fan Li ever was. And it's,
he's a very popular figure now. He's a very popular figure. There are several books about him, but not from the philosophical perspective.
Right. Yeah.
From an economic perspective. So he was regarded as a very successful Daoist businessman. So that's why he became popular, because he was so successful, and he became rich, and he he distributed his money to everyone, but he exhausted all of that, and then he gets rich again, and then he spread his money out again. So at least 3 times he used all his money, exhausted himself, but he became very efficient in making money by having the Daoist practice.
So I think the way he made money is so cool, right? So in summertime you want a boat because you're out on the lake fishing, but in wintertime you want a cart because everything's frozen, right? So Fan Li would make boats in the winter, and everybody thought he was crazy because no one's going to buy your boat, it's freezing. And he said, just wait.
Yeah. So
He had all these,
wonderful. So he uses money for charity.
yeah,
That's amazing. That's amazing.
yeah. I have, I really like this guy, Fanli. I really like him. As a philosopher, I like him. As a human being, I like him. And he was rich, he was a philosopher, he had a gorgeous girlfriend. I think that's really cool. The most gorgeous woman in China ever, right?
Right. The most
So,
beautiful,
I
most
mean,
beautiful lady. But so that's why people think he successfully applied the Taoist teaching. Once you succeed, you withdraw from your public life. You're doing something for your own interest. So that's another example he showed us. Don't be in that position. Like he helps the Wu, the Yue to defeat Wu, but he doesn't hold that position. He left that place doing something else. So he's successful in all the fields he tried.
yeah, that doesn't sound like Huang-Lao Taoism very much, because if you're Huang-Lao, you probably want to keep your job in the government, right? Because that's your commitment, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't have that. I mean, they're all the different states. He said, I helped you. You've defeated Wu. I've helped you. Now I'm going away because I don't want to die. Because Go Jen.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have a question from Gail. Mother.
Oh, I go.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for the interesting presentation. I've learned a lot because I also didn't know about him.
Yeah, right.
I just wonder, I mean, these are all very fascinating stories, just as Chenxia was just telling us, right? And you can easily see why such stories are popular right now, right? How they fit into contemporary society, and with a kind of whatever research of some kind of Daoist ideas in a hyper capitalist and so forth world. So that's all interesting and fascinating. I just wonder what the texture, what are the primary sources here? These all sounds like fascinating legends, and I mean, some of the texts you mentioned, whatever, like the Wenzo or so, they're usually, as far as I know, mostly like Han Dynasty sources. So we don't really have any kind of. Looks like we just have some stories, but that there is very basically close to nothing of the actual contemporary sources, that these are basically just legends that circulated, and then, as we often have in the Chinese language scholarship, they construct like very elaborate historical narratives about some of the materials that are then put together in the Han Dynasty historical sources and the secondary and tertiary and quaternary sources. Or are there any primary materials or writings that can be with some sort of kind of historical accuracy ascribed to him directly? What's the source situation?
The source texts are, as far as I understand, there's just 3 of them. I think Chenxia can help me with this. 2 of them, I think, are from Shiji. Maybe 1 is from Bangu, but then the great one is from the Guoyu.
Right, but the Guoyu just has the legends of about his life, basically. It doesn't have any. It doesn't have any. I mean, just a few stories about it. It's not like writings by or ascribed to him.
Yeah, are you familiar with the Yue Xia?
No, I'm not.
There aren't even really stories. It's just a record of the questions and answers between the king and Fanli.
Right.
So there's not even any real drama there.
Mm.
Yeah. The Jiran Pian Chen Xia is writing it on the chat board. At the end of the Yeyu Xia, it does describe Fan Li leaving, but it doesn't really say anything else. And at the beginning of Yeyu Xia, there's no introduction. So the Yeyu Xia says nothing about, well, the historical sources, again, they're like pretty late, right? But they said, I mean, there's a whole story about Fan Li, like he was held hostage in Wu with Go Jian for a couple of years. And that's how they became really good friends. And Wenza, met Fan Li probably, according to the legends, through their shared interest in Lao Tzu's philosophy.
Right. Well, this is all like, all this stuff
Never-
we hear then in the Han Dynasty, and we have
Yeah.
like endless of these stories about all kinds of people. And they're very interesting stories. They tell you a lot about, just as what people say today about Fan Li and write whatever papers for business people, that tells you a lot about contemporary China, just as probably these stories about Fan Li from the Han Dynasty and the legends you find tell you a lot about the Han Dynasty. But you're trying to talk to about someone who's living in the 6th century BCE, but it doesn't look like there's much, even like remotely close, a source.
Sure, I'm not actually arguing
Like 500 years gap we're
Right.
talking. Yeah.
I'm not
Like-
actually arguing that Fan Li actually existed or that Lao Tzu existed. I'm not making any kind of historical argument.
But it looks like the text you're referring to from the I haven't read any of those, but the Chinese scholars, I didn't know the name, right?
Yeah.
But it looks like the text you quoted from take both Fan Li and Laozi as historical people and try very much in a kind of a standard way of Chinese scholarship to kind of reconstruct like whatever the biography of these people.
Yeah. Well,
So I think, yeah, so which, I'm just saying what it is. I'm not saying they are wrong. It's just like how to say they're very courageous in using the sources in that way, right? That doesn't mean that the sources aren't interesting. I do think they're very interesting. I wasn't just aware of. I didn't fully understand. But now that you said you're not saying that Fan Li was a historical person, then yeah.
I'm just interested in his philosophy. And I just present like the stories about Fan Li just to give sort of a jumping off point for thinking through his philosophy. That's what I'm not. I'm not a sinologist.
Well, I'm not a sinologist either. Absolutely not. That wasn't my point. I was just trying. It was just an honest question. I was just trying to figure, because as I said, I hadn't heard about Fan Li, right? So I'm not. I was just wondering what the discourse is about, right? And that's why and then I ask myself, did I somehow, is there like serious historical evidence that he was actually, and do we have any excavated text, which I hadn't heard of, or do we have any manuscripts or anything else like this? Because it would be like a big hole in my knowledge. But then you seem to confirm that most of the stuff is just like or basically all of it is just like Han Dynasty and later.
Well, I mean that's my point. Like, how do you date the Goryeo? I mean,
right.
That's a
It's
pretty
difficult.
early text.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, but maybe. Yeah, but
Yeah.
all these texts are very usually very complex collections of different materials.
Yeah. So do you see the chat board? Can you see the chat board?
Hmm.
Chengxia
can.
has listed the sources.
Yeah,
Right.
you know, finally, this historical figure, he did wrote something, especially on like Binfa, the arts of war. He has 2 chapters on the arts of war, but these 2 chapters got lost. So the sources about him is connected from the books I just listed. So
Right.
we don't have a book. We don't have a book written by him, and or nor we unearthed some materials by him.
Right. But these materials are mostly, seems, Han Dynasty materials, like the Shiji or the Wenzi, right? These are usually considered Han Dynasty, and the Goryeo is complex, and
Yeah, the Goryeo is very complicated,
yes,
but the Goryeo has the best shot of being the earliest.
right. I mean, that doesn't take anything away from the, as you say, from the philosophy or the fascinating stuff about the contemporary reception.
Yeah. If I were an archaeologist or whatever, I would not look for Fanli. I would look for Gojian. I would look for the king, and I would look for evidence that way. But I don't even know where to start for that sort of a project. But if other people were doing it, that's where they would have to start. Would be with Gojian and the ancient state of Yue at the end of the spring and autumn periods in the beginning of the Warring States. So there is a lot of historical evidence for the war between Wu and Yue, right? So that's what I'm saying. Wu, I mean, the history of Wu and Yue is as much known as any other, probably more so than other battles for the spring and autumn period. And that's how I would frame it, the historical gaze on the on Fanli would have to prioritize the conflict between Wu and Ye at that point, which is different from Lao Tzu, right? Because there's nothing about Lao Tzu at all. There's no even association. Lao Tzu was an archivist at the libraries, so you'd have to go find information on ancient Chinese libraries. But
Well, and
Fan Li
that
was in a
too is
war.
just basically a legend. Yeah.
Yeah, but Fan Li was in a war. So the war that one's hard to question the dates or question the outcome or question
Right.
the thought. That's all pretty right there.
Right.
I think funny because he's also famous being a military strategist. So I think Professor Professor Chen just mentioned that the lost text about Binfa, but that does mention a lot, and I'm just wondering maybe the other military text, maybe I know some Tang text, use his name as a pseudonym, but he still consider him, even in the Tang Dynasty, he was considered very important military strategist. You mentioned Wenzi. I don't know if Hu Guanzi also like an important Huang-Lao text. Also, and I have no idea whether Fanli is ever mentioned in that text or anything about, might be some connection there too,
Yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid the time is up now, so we needed to conclude this meeting with you, Tom. At your place, maybe it's 3 a.m. now, right? So it's also
it's 3 o'clock.
Wow.
Right.
3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
So.
Oh, it's fine. This has been so much fun. It's just
Yeah.
been great fun.
Yes,
I've just
we also,
really enjoyed it.
So thank you again, Tom, and thank you to all the participants. Have a nice rest, good night, and nice
Yeah,
evening to everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
great. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye,
you.
Rose. Bye,
Thank you.
Changsha. Bye, Ellen. Bye,
Bye,
everyone. Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Bye, everyone. Have a good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye-bye.
Please, everyone, come to the reception.
Okay.